Mr. President, Ray McGovern is here to brief you.
Oh, finally, somebody as old as I am. Boy, we're getting. You must get beat around the head a lot too, where you're still CIA briefing, and you look worse than I do, But
Well,
I got to wear these glasses because people don't know it's not just for sun. It's prescription, and it changes
oh,
things, and it helps me get on the stage. But I could talk honestly to you, Ray, because it's no fun getting old, but we're just both sharp as can be, and that's what we're here to do. And this is going to be a good week for me because Trump, he puts down NATO. He doesn't understand. People make fun of me when I say we're running the world, right? That was what I did with that Stephanopoulos who used to work for Clinton. He never did like me. But, we do run the world. That's what we're here to do. That's America's great. You're not going to be made great again. It's great now. Hillary pointed that out. We always been great, and we do run the world. We've been running at least since the end of that. When we won the Second World War, Russians did. They claimed they did a lot. They didn't do anything. We gave them all the stuff to run. But anyway, yeah, So with you, I can leave the glasses on. I really do need them. Read here a little bit. But NATO this week. This is a big deal. This is when we show that I know what I'm talking about. This is what I say. I don't need to take a test. You don't need a test. How we think. You do things, and I do it every day. I'm tested every hour. So tell me first of all, what's going on? This Hungarian guy, I'm forgetting his name, Orban.
Yeah,
Or,
Viktor Orban. Uh-huh.
Victor.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you always got the pronunciation. But okay, yeah. So what's he doing? He's meeting with Putin, and then he meets with Xi over there in China. Boom, boom, boom. And he was trying to make peace in the Ukraine. We don't want that's going to betray the Ukrainians. And so, what's going on there with all that stuff?
Well, Mr. President, you're quite right in focusing on Viktor Orban and his machinations over the last several days. But if I may, I just like to pick up on your comment about running the world. Uh, I know that you have quoted Madeleine Albright before in private as well as public conversations, citing her as the wise woman who invented this indispensable role for the United States. Just to put a little context around that, just kind of as a refresh or a reminder, it was the case. We were the indispensable country in the world. As a matter of fact, George Tenon, the famous person who invented the containment doctrine for the Soviet Union, he said in the first State Department policy planning paper that the United States has domain over 50% of the world's natural resources, but only comprises 6.5% of its population. And therefore, we have to devise policies that can't be sweetened by soft concepts like human rights or things of that nature. We have to exert our power to keep that disequilibrium, to keep that disproportionality, and it's going to come to the exercise of raw power. That's what Kennan said back in 1948. 50 years later, and this gets us to the NATO thing, when Bill Clinton was starting to enlarge NATO, uh, Kennan had quite a different tune. He said, "No, this is really crazy. This is the worst thing you can do." I have a little quote from him here. Well, let's forget it. He says, uh, this is something that will begin the Cold War. I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely as it will affect their policies. It's a tragic mistake. There's no reason for it whatsoever. No one was threatening anyone else. That's 1998, so it's 50 years later. Now, the reason I mention that is because NATO is conceived by most people as being a reaction to the Warsaw Pact, right? Warsaw Pact. And then we had to react to make sure that the Russians didn't take over Europe. Actually, Mr. President, you should know that the NATO came first, right? NATO came several years before the Warsaw Pact. So it was a way of controlling Europe. And as the first Secretary General said,
Hey, Ray.
yeah,
Do you know what kind of week I've been having here? people give me information that I can use because I'm not going to give some history lesson. I'll get something wrong, and everybody give me a hard time about it. That's the game they're playing now. They're after me on everything. Tell me. I mean, NATO saved the free world, right? It stopped communism and saved the free world.
Well, it
Somebody
certainly.
asked me the other day in my family, so what are we doing with putting NATO in with Japan and Korea and Asia and China? And I couldn't think of the answer. Don't quote me on this now.
No,
Where's that? Is that White House intern there? Is he still listening to this? Yeah. What's his name? Yeah.
there he
Yeah.
is.
Okay, you just don't, none of this is to be recorded now. What I'm saying, but frankly, Ray, I need information I can use here that doesn't trip up. We're in a different ballgame. I got 4 months here to show that yeah, okay, we run the world. I got to show that I can run it,
Yeah.
and frankly, I didn't know the answer to that. I mean, so I thought NATO was just for Europe, and what are we doing in expanding it to Asia? What's it got to do with China? Don't we have other pacts and other things? What's happening here? And
Well, well, they are expanding it. In
what is NATO anyway? It used to be what? Just a bunch of European countries. How many was it? Like
no,
16 or something like that? I
it,
can't even remember who's in it now.
it
How
was
many you got in there now?
it was 14 in my day. It's now grown like Topsy to 32 members. Some of them of very little consequence. And the whole idea was to confront the Soviet Union and make sure that it didn't invade Western Europe. Now, what I was about to say is now it's an anachronism. It's a military alliance. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, there was no enemy. You ask
So
why?
you sounding like Trump. He says we don't need it, or they're not paying their share. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
At the risk of sounding like Trump, there are facts, and the facts are that when the Soviet Union imploded, Putin went to Bill Clinton and said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let us join NATO. We'll be all one happy alliance here, and we'll nourish each other and grow." And Clinton said, "Wow, let me ask my team." He came back that evening at dinner and said, "My team says no, no." And the reason, of course, is that if you have no enemy, you have no profiteering by the military industrial complex. So that was the situation shortly after Putin took over. So he took it to heart, and he built up a military in Russia that hardly could be believed in terms of what he claimed. And now it's turned out that it's very, very effective and that it has hypersonic missiles.
Right. All this. Look, I got to appeal to people like this young Max here. How'd you get in this job anyway? You was that Diane Feinstein? She's your aunt, or knows you, or knows your aunt's aunt, or anyway. But you got all the security clearances, right? And you're on our side of this thing, right, Max? Okay. So what this guy's telling Ray is telling me? You know any of that? So what's this whole thing? What has NATO got to do with Korea and all that? What do they teach in school, and what do you know about this?
Well, as far as I know, Mr. President, NATO is there to defend democracy globally, and it's a great tool to do that. And I think
Oh,
that that's the way.
globally. So we defend NATO. Then it should be in Asia, right? NATO. I mean, that's
Yeah.
confusing me a little bit because people keep asking me, what are we doing now? We're lining up Japan, Korea, who knows what else. And I'm getting confused because here's India now, Modi. He's also not only Orban, is that his name? Modi, he went to see Putin. It's India, right? And what is he doing? I mean, now it's my guys over at the Pentagon. They told me that India gets a lot of its arms from Russia, and they're buying they're the biggest oil purchaser, or biggest China. So much for our barrier. So Max, what do you know about NATO? Here we go. Ask the CIA guy here, McGovern. See, give him a test. Right? What are they teaching you there?
Uh,
Well, well,
Go
I
ahead, go ahead, because you're the people I got to reach. They say I'm too old to reach people like you. What are you, 20 or something?
Well, yeah, the thing is, Mr. President, is that I think what you're doing is great. I think that the only people that don't like NATO are the far right and maybe some people that are compromised by Russia. And um, I think that you're doing the right thing. And the only people that young people, in my opinion, all the young people I know, my friends from Harvard and Yale, and all of us guys, we really love NATO and we think it's a great thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
so
we
we
think
need to
the only
give.
people that don't like it really are, the Trumpists and the Russians. So I'm a little
Mhm.
concerned with the advice that Ray here is giving you, and I would love, to an opportunity to maybe work with you closely on this.
Yeah, well, don't be disrespectful of older people. Ray's been with the CIA, was there for 27 years before you were ever even born, and he knows. Let's get back to Ray here. Ray, give it to me short and sweet. What are they going to pull on me this week? This NATO meeting is the 75th anniversary. That much I know. Uh, what's going to happen here? Are they falling apart? I know Turkey plays footsie with Putin. Now you got Hungary. India is now. We were supposed to be isolating Putin. Where did that go?
That didn't really succeed, Mr. President. The isolation really worked the other way. We and the British and other white folks in NATO pretty much are the minority now. The big issue here, of course, is, as usual, whether NATO wants to bring Ukraine in as a member. Now, that has already caused one war, namely the war that goes on now in Ukraine. And that was very clear because the Russians told us way back in 2008, when a NATO summit like the one starting tomorrow happened in Bucharest. And the final declaration under Bush and Cheney and Condoleezza Rice said Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. That set down the cudgel there, that threw down the gauntlet, and the Russians have been trying to tell us ever since, look, this is a no-no. Niet means niet. This is a red line. And if you take Ukraine into NATO, we're going to have to decide whether we need to invade Ukraine or not. The last thing of consequence that happened was
Wait a
Jen's.
minute, wait a minute. They invaded Ukraine, and then
They,
we beat them back, right? The Ukrainian people rose up, beat them back, and now they seized 4 provinces there. And now what is China's talking about? They want some kind of peace deal, right? That's what they're
Yeah,
talking about.
I was referring to the outset of this when
Orban.
we decided that we should have Ukraine in NATO. That was in 2008, and it came down to 2022. And again, the Russians laid out a plan. Look, we don't want Ukraine in NATO, and here's how we can restructure the security structure in Europe. And if you agree not to let Ukraine in NATO, we will not invade Ukraine. Now, how do I know that? Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, said so on the 7th of September last year before the EU Parliament. What he said was, the Russians, they said, we will invade Ukraine if you don't come to an arrangement with us. And so we said no arrangement, and so they invaded Ukraine, and so they wanted no expansion from NATO, and they got two more, Sweden and Finland, as if that compensates for destroying a whole country, killing upwards of 400, 500,000 young men. In other words, that was the name of the game. They wanted Ukraine in NATO so that NATO would be on that long border with Russia and able to be a bulwark against Russia for anything that NATO, a military alliance, mind you, might plan.
Ray, you got to help me now. And it's not a function of age, but there's a lot to know. The more longer you live, the longer you learn, and so forth. But and sometimes I just slip back and I think about, how the hell did Putin? Isn't he the guy we picked when he was with that drunken guy, Yeltsin? The guy they said he's too drunk. The guy who opposed Gorbachev before when Reagan was going to sell out the country. And then under the first President Bush, we saved it, but we backed Yeltsin there at some point, and then Yeltsin was, drunk most of the time. Most of those Russians are drunk or used to be. Putin is some kind of teetotaler nutcase. So anyway, uh, Putin was our guy, right? Our guy, and he said he hated communists and everything. Now he's getting along with India. He gets along with China. He gets along with all these people, Hungary, and he isn't a communist, right? So NATO was about stopping communism. See, I think Trump is going to go wild on this if I have to debate him again, because he's going to say, "What does NATO do, and who's paying for it? Why don't those other people pay for it?" That's what he says. You know, well, I got to be able to defend NATO. I got to
Hmm.
defend NATO this week, right? So, what is the if there is Putin a communist? Is he still a communist?
No,
Do we
he's not.
know? Do we got intelligence? Does the CIA know? Is that why he's getting hooked up with China?
Mr.
And then where does
President,
India? You got to help me make some sense of this.
Mr. President, if he's a communist still, he's a really, really sneaky fellow because there's nothing to indicate that he feels that communism is the wave of the future. As a matter of fact, he's disavowed it openly,
Yeah, and he
and he's
tells me he's a Christian. He tells me he's a faith person, right?
and he's a practical guy who wants to put Russia back on the map and has largely succeeded in doing that. As for we picking him, not really, Mr. President. What happened was Yeltsin groomed him to take over, and then he asked somebody else to take over when he was just about petering out from drunkenness, and that didn't work out. And so Putin was a second choice, but he rose to the occasion. He said he'd rebuild Russia and that he'd stand up, make sure that people didn't tear Russia apart. Now, that was after a decade of precisely that, of the oligarchs east and west absconding with the wealth from Russian national resources and so forth. So he's responsible for reaching out to China as a counterweight to us in the United States, and done splendidly on that because China, as you know, is pretty much joined at the hip with Russia, and so it's really two against one now. If you count North Korea and the defense treaty that Russia has with North Korea, you can say it's 2.5 against one.
Yeah, but explain because look, and old people can think clearly, and I could think clearly. I've been around a long time, but to try to make sense of a world that changes all the time, that's a different thing. Now, my memory was that when China and Russia were both communist countries, they didn't get along. They fought. They shot at each other over there was a what do you call it? Sino-Soviet dispute, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I got it right. The
Yep.
Sino-Soviet dispute goes back to Mao didn't get along with Stalin,
You got it.
and then who was it? Mao went to Russia. Khrushchev treated him like shit. Kept him locked in a hotel room or something. I remember hearing all those stories. So when they were both communists, they didn't get along at all.
That's right.
And we got into that Vietnam War because Vietnam was supposed to be beholden to these communists. They read the same Marx or Lenin or somebody. So now Vietnam's still communist. China's still communist. They don't get along so well. We think we can work with Vietnam to counter China. Russia's not communist, but now for the first time, they're getting along with China. Meanwhile, you got India and China that all my life I've been hearing don't get along and they're going to fight and they're fighting about their border and everything, and yet they both getting along with Russia. Why is Modi in Russia now? What's he doing there? What's going on? It's hard. Now if I ever express this, I'm talking to you like a guy I've known a long time, right? If I say this to other people, let's say, well, his brain's not working well. He's not thinking clearly. But how do you make sense of this? Why did we lose Putin? He believes in capitalism. He believes in God, Christianity, right? The Russian Orthodox is another form of Christianity, but he believes in that. So why India and what is this brick thing? that they keep talking about. Why are they in the same alliance, or that Shanghai thing I just heard about? And so what we got going is NATO, which is a military alliance to stop Russia when it was communist. Now we're using it to stop both China and Russia. Where is the sense in all this, Ray?
Well, Mr. President, if I may say so, there are a lot of folks that think we're overextended, particularly in trying to extend some purview for NATO, the national, the Atlantic establishment, to the Pacific. So when you have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization fooling around China and Japan and so forth, you've got an overextended situation here, which is not going to work. Now, the focus this week is on NATO, and the question is how they will treat Ukraine. Now, the whole business is that the U.S. has refused to talk to the Russians, talk to the Russians with respect to how to fix this problem. Now, Orban, who we mentioned before, the president of Hungary, was in Kiev just 4 days ago, and then he visited Moscow. And lo and behold, as he left Moscow, he warned his interviewer, "Look, you're going to have a surprise on Monday." And on Monday today, he shows up in Beijing. And what's he doing? Well, he's making no bones about the fact that he's trying to create some sort of structure, whether it's only him or whatever, some sort of structure to get people to talk to one another.
Yeah,
Now,
but in another briefing I had earlier from the state, this guy Orban, he's the head of the European Union right now.
that's correct. Yeah.
Now, how
Yeah.
the hell did that happen? And what's
Well,
this? So
they have a
I thought the European Union, they were allied with us. So what's he doing?
they have a rotating presidency, and by chance, or providence, if you will, Orban has 6 months in this post. And he's made no bones about the fact that, look, I'm in this position of some authority. I'm going to do what I
What's the
can.
title? What's his title?
As president of the European Council, is it? Those European things kind of confuse me, but
But
he's
he's
got.
not a figurehead. He can speak or
Yeah,
leaders.
well, he's not been given permission by the other EU authorities, but whether he needs that or not, I mean, a different kind of person would solicit that. But Orban says, "Look, this has gone too far. This is far too serious. The solution is to talk to one another. So I'm going to talk to Zelensky." Goes to Zelensky and he says, "Look, here's an idea. How about an immediate ceasefire without any conditions?" And Zelensky looks, and publicly, Zelensky's, no, we can't do that. We can't trust the Russians. So Orban goes to Moscow. He talks to Putin, okay? And then they have this final press conference afterwards. And one of the reporters says, now, Mr. Orban, what did Zelensky say when you proposed this arrangement to include an immediate ceasefire? And Orban's a clever guy. He turned to President Putin and he said, "Well, I told President Putin." And so the reporter says, "Well, President Putin, will you share with us what Zelensky's reaction was?" And Putin says, "No." Now, what's my point here? There's some secret stuff going on here. There's some leeway in both positions, okay? Orban is trying to get people together so at least they can talk, okay? And I imagine, and the State Department has not been answering my calls, I imagine that Orban's people are in touch with your people and would very much like to meet with you this week before Orban leaves Washington with the other NATO members. So you might be alert for that because it's going to look very funny if Orban can speak to the head of Ukraine and he can speak to the head of Russia and he can speak to Xi Jinping, and then he has to speak to you and he doesn't get an interview. So you might want to keep that in mind. This might be an opening where you could find out, what flexibility there really might be in Putin's position, for example, because if anyone would know that by now, Orban would, and they're holding their cards close to the vest. Witness the fact that Putin said, "No, I won't share with you what Orban told me about Zelensky's
So what
reaction."
the hell are they talking about? We just committed to 10 years of backing for Ukraine. And then the Russians, they're not going to give them back Crimea. They claim it was historically the seat of the whole Russian Empire and Catherine the Great and all that crap, and so and then those four provinces, they're mostly Russian speaking people, right?
That's
That
correct. Yeah.
that intern Max, you still on there? That kid? Hello? Yeah, Max.
Yes.
Yeah, we wake up. You're working in the White House, for God's sake. Okay, tell the guy from the CIA here what you were telling me about Ukraine and the four provinces of Crimea. I don't know where you heard that stuff. You went to some kind where young people do. They're talking about politics all the time. So what was that crap you were giving me the other day?
Are you talking about 2014, Mr. President, in
Yeah.
2015?
Well, the whole thing about that Ukraine is a minority. They speak Russian and the whole stuff. And what was that?
Well, in 2014, with the administration that you were vice president of, worked to help Ukraine regain their democracy by overthrowing the government, the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych, and then and you guys did that by funding, lots of NGOs that were on the side of the protesters. There's arguments about whether the protesters were the majority or the minority, but I think they were the majority. I don't know what Ray says about that. And then Putin actually annexed Crimea after, and he said that the precedent established by what we did in Kosovo was the way that he was able to do that. But the difference there is that we're a democracy, I believe, and then Putin is a dictator. So it doesn't exactly work the same way when you have two different kinds of governments doing
Yeah,
it. So
yeah, but
that's
that's but the thing you were telling me, because the sticking point is going to be Crimea, yeah, and then the four provinces, right? I got that right? That they control now most of it, and then they're going to say these are people. It's all bullshit, because they had an election, but that don't mean anything. But he says that Max, you were saying they speak Russian and they got a different branch of the
yeah.
church
The
that
eastern
they.
part of Ukraine is ethnically Russian, so a lot of them actually support
Ray,
Russia.
Ray, is that right, Ray?
That's
Does this
correct.
kid
Yeah.
know what he's
Hmm.
talking about? Yeah. So
Yeah.
why does anybody tell me this stuff? So what is Orban doing? Is he wants to give away those four provinces and let Russia stay in the Crimea and call that peace? Is that what you think? You know what Trump would do to me? I'll get 10% of the vote.
Well,
What do you?
that's what
And, and,
Orban's.
and you can tune out there, Max. Thanks. That's what you were saying the other day, right? I try to listen to these young people and talk to them, but I don't know where they're coming from. They don't get the patriotism that Ray, you joined when you were in college, right? You went into ROTC, you went into Army Intelligence, then spent 27 years. You know that we're on the side of virtue.
Well, Mr. President, in realpolitik, virtue is in the eye of the beholder. Uh, what would I say about, well, in 2014, things changed, and that was, as Max pointed out, because we orchestrated, together with our European colleagues, a coup d'etat in Kiev, replacing Yanukovych, who was relatively pro Russian, and replaced him with a regime. The first thing of which they did was declare that we want to join NATO. A no no. The Russians had made that clear in 2008. And that slithers down all the way to today because that's the big deal. Now, uh, Biden, Biden, excuse me, Mr. President, uh, you, Mr. President, have talked about uh, Putin not stopping.
Was that a senior moment? Was that an episode, or is that an illness there, Ray?
Well,
Have you been tested?
no, but
Huh? What they want to test me, they all want to test me.
you
You
know,
just made a typical
yeah,
slip. Even a young kid could make that slip, and they're
yeah,
hounding me for that.
yeah.
You said
I have to say,
you forgot
Mr.
who you were talking to.
Mr. President, that's a good point. I do herewith declare that I will submit to a neurological test and have the results publicized in the Washington Post if they're interested. So, what I was
Well,
saying was,
You're being a little flippant there. You know, the fact is they're hounding me with this crap, and I wonder how many heads of big businesses, how many heads of universities, how many people have power really want to have that kind of test. You
Mhm.
know, because we know part of the life cycle, you slow down. I don't walk the same way, I don't speak the same way, and so forth. But we're having an intelligent discussion here, Ray, about stuff that most people don't know about. You know, they don't know about it, and they run countries too. Tell me what the hell is going on with France and Macron and all that stuff. I thought this guy had Western Europe solid, you know, and France solid, and he was going to even send some troops over there to Ukraine and you know, do some stuff. Now he can't even win a goddamn election, you know, and what you got these lefties? That's another thing. Before we end here, what the hell is going on? England, what the old Labour Party? I thought they were finished. They come back in, and then you got in France there. You got some people who are really dangerous there in this what they call popular fronts. Got something to do with World War II, and but they claim they well, there was a popular front against it. I don't even know what the hell that's. I never heard of that. But you know what's going on? Can we count? Remember right now, can we count on France and England and who's with us? You know, I know we got the Swedes is great because they used to be neutral. You're neutralist. You know, that's a phony position. But you know some of them others. But what's happening? And try to do it faster because we got to get out of here. I
Okay.
gotta
Well,
prepare for all these people coming. I can't even remember all the countries. That's one of the really bad things. How many did you say there are? 35 now in NATO?
32. 32.
32, and
Yeah.
they're all going to be here, and I got supposed to remember who's running each country
Well,
and where these countries are, and
they're name tags, Mr. President, so it's real easy to remember their
well, make
names.
sure they got the no name tags on here because they give me a chart. They say this is how you climb up the steps, and now there's fewer steps, thank God, on Air Force One. But they tell you, you come in on the left, you go, but they don't those cards. First of all, they got to be big, or I don't know what the hell they're saying. And then everybody, the press makes a big thing about it. So I just know I get one of those. What does Trump call them? Shit ass countries. He's right in some ways. There's a hell of a lot of countries there. You know, and so I got to remember every one of them and what they eat for dinner and who's their leader. Well, okay, but cut it sweet and short.
Well, Mr. President, I think one thing you need to be aware of is that there's something very distinctive about all these leaders, and that is that they're all lily white, like you and like me. Unlike the majority of the rest of the world, which is people by people of color, we white folks are all kind of put over into the corner where NATO is the primary power. So that's one factor to remember. Another is that your opponent in the election has been quoted by Mr. Putin himself in answer to a question about what about Mr. Trump saying that he'd like to settle this thing in one day. And Putin said, "We welcome that. That's a good idea. We're not quite sure how he's going to do it, but we approve it and we welcome it." So now, for what that's worth, you should know that that's out there, and that these people will be hearing that. But more important, they'll be hearing a firsthand report from Orban. And as I say, if you haven't heard from your people yet, that Orban would dearly love to speak to you, I fully expect that. There's one other thing, Mr. President, that I want to make sure I call to your attention. That General Dynamics factory for very sensitive and sophisticated munitions that was blown up just a couple of days ago. It's a little bizarre that there's nothing very much in the press or anything else about that, and we just hope that the FBI is uh, more devoted to answering your telephone calls than ours, because to the degree that investigation is proceeding, it'll be really interesting to know who has the incentive or cui bono for blowing up the kinds of factories that make all kinds of arms that are headed to Ukraine. So these are things that we, the intelligence community, try to put together, but very often we run into resistance for security reasons to share this information. So best I can do on that one will be to make sure that you know that this investigation is going on. We don't know here or what the results are, but
Look,
you want to
what
look
do you
into
know?
that.
What do you know? Because no one's ever made it clear to me who blew up those pipelines
Yeah.
that the Germans had invested so much in. Do we know that even to this day? I keep wondering about that.
Yes,
When's that might come up?
Mr. President, we know that. At least we're convinced that Cy Hirsch is correct in reconstructing the whole episode there as to how those things were blown up. And of course, there were warnings by Blinken and by Newland and actually by you yourself saying, that pipeline will not go through. And all of a sudden, it was blown up. So there are people in Europe
Well,
that
why you tell me about this guy Cy Hirsch? Isn't he that? What was it? He's the guy who invented that whole My Lai thing that we killed a lot of civilians in Vietnam and everything. I mean, didn't he write that? That was it. He
Yeah, he
got the
did. He
Pulitzer
did.
Prize or something for
He
that.
didn't. He didn't invent it, Mr. President. He
How come he's
reported
not
on
in
it.
jail? How come he? I mean, he's like that guy Assange that they're now saying nice things about. I got my hand forced, and because the British wouldn't go along with just turning him over easily, we could have had him in a maximum security, and that would have been over. Now, who God knows what he's going to say? But you're quoting the CIA is quoting Cy Hirsch to me.
Well, on this kind of well-documented research item, Cy is the best. Witness, my
So we
lie.
did Mila, we did that.
Well, I
We
can't
killed
confess to
we
that
killed
because,
2-year-olds and shot them, or our troops did.
oh, in my lie, yes, that's happened. I mean, that's nobody disputes that.
We
Um,
we we admit that.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was an investigation, and Lieutenant Calley was convicted and then pardoned by Nixon, if memory serves. And then, of course, there were the Abu Ghraib torture abuses. Cy Hirsch reported on
Ray,
that as
Ray,
well.
Ray,
Yeah,
Ray. We don't say torture. We say enhanced interrogation.
yeah,
That's a scientific
yeah,
expression endorsed by leading psychologists,
yeah.
psychiatrists who did the program, right? Enhanced interrogation. What are you doing? We're running out of time here, but I don't mean to revisit all this stuff. What I want to know is, and I want you to give it to me straight. Are our allies unraveling? Are they losing heart? Because after all, it was Boris Johnson, that guy. He was a good guy. He went over there and told the Ukrainians, told Zelensky, you can't make peace with the Russians. We're in with you for the long haul. Play with us, and you're going to get everything. So now he's not there. He's discredited in England. You got the Labour's coming back now. Sometimes Labour is even better on these war things, like Tony Blair was. But still, I worry about them, what's happening there. And then what do you got going on in France? You just have avoided that. You got a popular front. You got these other people, and they're raising some questions. Do we? That's the heart of NATO, right? France, Germany. Germany's run by people who think we screwed up their economy. They had that cheap oil from Russia. Now they don't get it. They're suffering. And the leadership is embarrassed, even though they're supposed to be on the left. They're embarrassed by the people who normally support them. So let's end this, though, because I got to meet these folks from NATO this week. And aside from remembering their names and all that, and damn it, somebody had told me we expanded this far with all these half-baked countries or whatever. What does he call them? Shithead. What did Trump say?
Whole. It's not head, but whole.
Shithole,
Yeah.
shithole countries. It's true. When you got to remember, 35 names that he's, and now they want to put Asian in. How the hell are we getting that? We're going to have Korea and Japan, but we want them in NATO now. I mean, how do we defend that?
Well, Mr. President, again,
Let's just wrap this up. But tell me, are we losing this? I know they always think I'm losing my mind. I think my mind's pretty clear. I just think that what I'm told to sell, that's what a president does. I'm supposed to, don't confuse the thing being sold with the thing itself. Okay, I mean the thing itself we know is a pretty big mess. You and I know that.
Mhm.
The thing being sold is democracy, freedom, accountability, right? It's Western civilization, the future of the world, right? How do I sell that when it looks like our part of the world is floundering, is dividing, is full of unhappy campers? What's going on here?
Well, Mr. President, I agree it's a hard sell. If you look at it and the way we have supported Ukraine against a much more powerful neighbor, Russia, when your president and mine, Obama, warned that the worst thing we could do about Ukraine would be to give those people the idea that they could prevail in an open confrontation with Russia. So they're in a bad place now. And the worst news, of course, is that it's just a matter of time. Most people think weeks, which would allow Putin's forces to move forward up to and including Kiev if he decides to take them. So that's what this NATO summit is all about. And people are aware of that. And the information or the money that we have appropriated to help Ukraine not going to get there on time. And as I have warned you before, Mr. President, we think that Putin has the capability of finishing the whole mess before the election. So the question is there another possibility? And what Orban represents is an honest broker attempt to get people at least talking so that the worst doesn't happen before the election or whatever. Let me just finish with one thing that when you talk about enhanced interrogation techniques, Mr. President, you should be aware that that's a direct translation of Verschärfte Vernehmung, which is the Gestapo handbook description for enhanced interrogation technique. So maybe there'd be a better way to phrase it, but it's not. It's not any softer to say enhanced interrogation techniques when you realize that this Verschärfte is enhanced. Okay, Vernehmung is interrogation techniques, and Cy Hirsch, who reported on the destruction of the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, was responsible for uncovering and reporting on these so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. But I just wanted to put that on the record so that you know when you quote that phrase, that was something devised by Dick Cheney's speechwriters, and it doesn't mean anything other than what was spelled out in that Gestapo handbook. We have the handbook, by the way.
So you think I should release that report that Max is the senator appointed him, Dianne Feinstein, that report on torture? Because we never released that,
That
and
would
no
be
president.
that would be an act of extreme courage to do that. As you know, Obama and John Brennan, who had some unexplained, very, very tight connection, Obama did everything he possibly could to deprive Dianne Feinstein of outing that report. Now, to her credit, to her great credit, she outed the executive summary, which goes something like a couple hundred pages. Okay, it's
Yeah, but we
awful.
redacted the shit out of it. Come on, Ray.
It's still very clear. It's still
Yeah, it's
very
very
clear.
clear. I agree with you. We should have redacted more. But what
Yeah,
am I saying? You know what I'm saying.
yeah.
The public didn't need to have that kind because it breaks their spirit. We
Well,
don't like. I mean, that's why we say enhanced interrogation because we don't want to say. I mean, torture. But sometimes you got to do torture, right, Ray? You're in the CIA. You know all that. You've been
torture
doing torture forever.
torture doesn't work, Mr. President.
Ah,
If
ah.
you want the reliable information, the head of the army said on the same day that he knew that George W. Bush was going to get up and advertise these enhanced interrogation techniques, General John Kimmons, 3-star head of Army intelligence, got up at the Pentagon at the same time and said, we know from previous experience, especially the experience of the last 3 years, that never has it been possible to get reliable information from using torture techniques. We know that, and we know that especially from the experience of the last 3 years, period, end quote. Gutsy general. What happened to him? Well, he didn't get promoted, that's for sure, but he told the truth. So torture doesn't work. As a matter of fact, it's counterproductive. Here's an example. You're on Iwo Jima, right? And this is a true story. A lieutenant, sergeant walking by trying to see if there's any Japanese around. So, oh, this Japanese comes out of the cave, and the sergeant says, "Lieutenant, should I plug him?" And the lieutenant says, "No, don't plug him. We don't do that." So the guy spoke French. So did the lieutenant. They got together. The guy came in. They apprehended him. Guess who he was? He was the code clerk for the Japanese fleet. They took him back to Washington, helped to break the code. And that's the kind of thing. If you get people shooting people who are about to be captured, then they're going to shoot you first. If they think that maybe they'll treat you according to the Uniform Code of Military Justice and Geneva Conventions, then there's a chance you could have a prize, like this particular guy who didn't look like a code clerk, but was. So that's just one example of why not only torture doesn't work or shooting people doesn't work, but that sometimes it's really counterproductive.
And Ray, not that this is helpful to me anywhere. The last thing in the world I want to get talking about this election is torture or enhanced technique. But just between us, you were at the CIA. Now you were in a different division. They're doing. I got all that. The bad guys or the other guys, they're over there. But did you ever tell them that story?
I didn't.
Well, you weren't a whistleblower. You weren't got like Julian Assange. You wouldn't be here talking to me now, right?
Well, I didn't actually learn that story until after I had retired, Mr. President.
Oh.
But we were in a position to comment on some of the more odd proposals by the operatives on the other side of those turnstiles that we had on every floor. But very rarely were we able to stop them.
By the way, you always bring up those turnstiles when I talk to you. What the hell were
they? Do you remember getting on the subway in New York? There were turnstiles. You had to put in a little token or something, and you push it. Well, there were those turnstiles on every floor except the basement of the new headquarters building in Langley, built around 1962. Okay, what was their function? The analysts where I work could not go to the operations side of the house without a special permission that they had to show the guard at the turnstiles. Why? Because they wanted to keep us separate. So when I learned about a coup, it was usually from the New York Times or CBS. Sometimes, and this is maybe interesting to you, Mr. President, under Director Colby, he saw the merit in giving us substantive people a look at some of the more bizarre covert action proposals that were coming up to him from the other side of the house. Very often would say, "That's crazy, Mister. That's never going to work. It's going to have a rebound effect. Our suggestion is that it's not a good idea." And sometimes he took our advice and was able to face them down. That didn't happen before the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961 or 1960. When he was persuaded, Kennedy was persuaded because Eisenhower said it was okay to try to invade Cuba. In other words, what didn't happen was they persuaded Kennedy that there would be a revolution in Cuba, that Fidel Castro would be thrown out from this great insurrection, and they never checked with the Cuban analysts. They never asked the people who have substantive expertise on Cuba, who would have said, "That's a cockamamie idea. Castro is very, 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 very popular, and there's no way that you're going to land on some beach and start a revolution." So that didn't happen. And Kennedy, that's one reason why Kennedy said, I'd like to tear up the CIA and scatter it to the four winds. And of course, in my view, that's what did Mr. Kennedy in.
All right, we're going to have to end this there, Ray. It's all interesting. But the main thing is you got to get somebody over there to give me a cheat sheet so I know who all these people are, from what country they are at this NATO meeting. And then something simple, like what am I asking them? I mean, is it personal? How's your wife? Or, what's going on? Or, because the economy is booming. I need that because I'm going to be, Ray, you've never been in my seat. I'm going to be checked, whatever. Okay.
Happy to do that, Mr. President. And please be alert for a call from Orban, because my sense is, and this is just from my experience, that he would like to talk to you, and that If he's unsuccessful in doing that, you will have the appearance of being the odd man out. He having talked to Zelensky, Putin, and Xi Jinping within the last 1 week. So
Yeah.
I'd be alert for that. I hope your people tell
But
you
when did he
about.
do, what I don't, okay, Orban, he's supposed to be on the right, right? What the
Yeah,
hell is he doing being this peacenik here, And the same thing with Modi and in India. What the hell is he doing? He's supposed to hate China and he's supposed to hate the communists, right? He's a religious guy. And what the hell is he doing cozying up to Putin, who's also supposed to be on the right? People get angry. They're saying, I can't. They say it's my brain is not working. Well, I'm going to tell you because I've known you a long time. What's not working is the logic and the facts that I'm supplied. Year after year, I've seen this all my life. They make fools out of us by lying to us. I'm talking about our own people. And then you got to remember all this stuff, right? So what do I do? What do I think about the French election? Now, should I be happy that the lefties won? And the right got defeated, or that our guy Macron, who I complained about in other times, now I'm supposed to worry that he doesn't seem to represent a very large number, and so I want to put yourself in you to put yourself in my shoes,
sure. Well,
okay?
he's a
Now,
weak system.
now, okay,
Macron is a weak
I know,
system.
but I'm talking about a larger problem, and we're going to have to stop this conversation. But think about it for the next time. Am I crazy or is the country crazy? Is my brain not working well or is our overall position not working well? Because I'm expected to go before the American people now this week and make sense of a world. Yeah, I voted and I voted on one side, I didn't want to go for that buildup and I went for that one. But the fact of the matter is, you know, our policy, our defense of what we're doing, our things around the world. I got to go out there and say we're defending democracy, we're advancing democracy, and it's not my brain that's not working well when I try to make it all logical. I've
Here's what
been
I
given
found.
a ridiculous hand here to play with, and that came from guys like you at the CIA and the State Department, and everyone else.
Oh,
So
Mr. President,
cut me a little slack here, Ray. It's a
I,
hard thing to sell.
I just hope that you have time to review the things that I've told you. I think you'll find them quite different from things you were told to say exactly a year ago when you said Putin had already lost in Ukraine. He had suffered a strategic defeat. Now, unfortunately, that is what Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, told you to say. But as you know now, it was dead wrong. And right now, it's only a matter of weeks before Putin can move and pretty much destroy what's left of the Ukrainian forces. And in my view, you're going to be faced with some really tough decisions. What do you do then, right before the election? Is there some way you can stem the Russian advance? And my fear, Mr. President, for what it's worth, is that your advisors will say, well, we did the cluster munitions when we ran out of the 155 millimeter. Now we have little low yield nukes. Let's use one of them. I hope you're prepared for that because I wouldn't put that past the people who have been advising you in error.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something, Ray. The reason that you're over there and supposed intelligence and everything, the reason I'm president is there's a third way. I'm going to say correctly, and you're going to give me information next time we talk to back it up, that it's somebody lost this thing. It's like who lost China, who lost this, who lost that. And they're not hanging it on me because we would have given those arms faster if the Republicans in Congress hadn't opposed. And if that Trump, when he was president, hadn't cozied up to Putin, they wouldn't have been able to do this thing at all, you know? So Trump is the pro Putin guy, the agent of Putin. I'm the guy that's trying to save the Ukrainian people and the rest of the people in this world from tyranny. And I want you to give me a position paper that backs that up. And if you can't do that, get someone else to do it and hand me your resignation. Okay?
Mr. President, I can tell you already that kind of position paper will be crafted in the tradition of your new advisors to please you, to tell you what you want to hear. We don't do that kind of stuff. I will give you a fact-laden brief, and you can decide yourself whether it supports that kind of view or whether it does not.
Okay, Ray, maybe it came down a little hard, and we are two old timers. By the way, how come when I stand up and the cameras come over, now they come in at all these different angles, they show I got this big bald spot back there. You got a big bald spot back there?
I'm not going to show you, Mr. President, because it
Oh,
would destroy my image.
yeah. Well, let me just say, because I had all those hairs put in there, and it looks good, but that probably hurt me more than all my gaffes and everything they take. But you could tell you're with me all the time. You know how reasonable, smart, and everything I am. So that's why I keep you around. We're on the same page, and what do these young people know? I hope that kid's not listening. All right, take care. See you next time. You still got a job.
Thank you, Mr. President.